At 9:14 a.m. local time, on the northwest coast of the Kherson region, a Russian KS-701 Tunets boat was sailing toward the shore. It broke the morning calm with the subtlety of a jackhammer in a library. On board, half a dozen Russian soldiers were preparing to disembark, completely oblivious to their immediate reality. 18,000 feet above their heads, the Grim Reaper was watching them in 4K resolution. They were not alone. For 27 minutes, a Bayraktar TB2 of Ukrainian naval aviation had been orbiting in silence, tracing lazy circles like a digital vulture. This wasn't a commercial drone with a grenade taped to it. It was Turkey's answer to the Predator. Its Rotax 912 engine hummed softly, pushing the metallic bird at a quiet 100 miles per hour. Why rush? The dam wasn't going anywhere. The pilot sat at a control station hundreds of miles away, in a room that smelled of stale coffee and ozone. He adjusted the zoom on the Westcam camera. The thermal image turned the Tunets into a bright white blob against the cold water. Tunets translates to tuna in Russian. If irony were lethal, the ship would have sunk based on its name alone. But irony doesn't blow up aluminum helmets. Laser-guided missiles do. The operator coldly observed the movements on the ground. They looked like ants at a picnic that was about to be stepped on. They moved with the arrogant confidence of those who believe war is something that happens to other people. Look at these tourists, the operator muttered, adjusting the laser designator with his thumb. On the display, the distance indicator marked the countdown to the firing solution. There was no epic music. Only the steady hum of server fans. 90 seconds remained before the tuna discovered that, in this part of the Black Sea, they were the bait. However, to understand how those Russians became the protagonists of a viral Telegram video, we must rewind. At 8:30 a.m., 44 minutes before the TB2 struck, a rectangular patrol box over the Dnieper had already been established. From 18,000 feet, the Westcam MX-15D sensor ball saw everything. And when we say everything, we are not exaggerating. This Canadian-made electro-optical system isn't a taped-on GoPro. It is a multispectral imaging suite so accurate, it could read the expiration date on a can of Russian rations from 20 kilometers away. The pilot sat at a ground control station that resembled a Twitch streamer setup more than a military outpost. It featured an ergonomic chair, multiple monitors, and likely an open energy drink. While the TB2 flew its pattern on autopilot, the pilot monitored the video signal, alternating between visual and thermal modes to avoid eye strain. That is the stark reality of drone warfare. 99% administrative boredom and 1% high-definition violence. But that morning, the adrenaline percentage was about to skyrocket. At 9:05, something broke the monotony on the thermal display. A hotspot was moving toward the northwest coast, leaving a warm wake that glowed on the sensor. The operator adjusted the zoom, and the blob resolved into the unmistakable shape of a KS-701 Tunets. Forget large warships. The Tunets is essentially an 8.8 meter aluminum patrol boat with a diesel engine, originally designed for Coast Guard and border services. It is not an armored Cerna class. It is a floating soda can. Yet the Russians, in their infinite logistical wisdom, were using it as a battle taxi. What made this contact special was not the ship itself, but its tactical stupidity. Through the thermal camera, the operator watched the aluminum hull scrape against the muddy shore. He counted the heat signatures on the deck. 1, 2, 6, 7 bright spots of human warmth. They were unloading. The operator smiled with the tense grimace of someone who knows something the other party does not. Russian soldiers began to jump ashore, passing supply boxes to each other as if they were moving house on a Sunday. They seemed relaxed. That was a serious mistake. For the MX-15D sensor, body heat does not lie. At 9:10, the tactical picture was crystal clear. A supply landing in a disputed area. It was a door-to-door delivery service courtesy of the Russian Navy. It wasn't just a ship, it was a piñata full of enemy infantry, stationary and exposed. The Russians had just committed the cardinal sin of modern warfare, standing still under a clear sky. The tuna was served. At 9:14, after minutes of patient stalking, the Ukrainian operator received the 3 words through his earpiece that would seal the fate of the Tunets. Authorized to attack. The order came directly from the command center of the 383rd UAV Brigade, where senior officers had been watching the same live feed. It was not a decision, taken lightly. Each MAML missile costs about $60,000, and the TB2 only carries 4. Spending that kind of money to destroy an aluminum boat worth less than a second-hand sports car seems like poor fiscal management. Moreover, striking there would reveal that Ukraine had drone coverage this far south, alerting Russian air defenses. But the calculation changed when the heads were counted. They weren't just attacking a ship. They were attacking an elite unit and its supplies. The value of erasing that unit from the map outweighed the risk and the cost. The operator immediately began setting up his attack run. The Tunets remained motionless on the shore. Unlike the usual moving targets, in the drone business, static targets are Christmas presents. The TB2's autopilot received new instructions. Break the patrol pattern and position for the optimal launch angle. The drone banked left, initiating a wide arc to align perfectly with the coastline. But this wasn't just a matter of range. The MAML needed a clean angle for the fragmentation to be lethal. The Westcam's 15 times optical zoom brought the view close enough to see details on the uniforms. And there was the fatal mistake. Most of the soldiers had huddled near the bow and on the sand to pass the crates around, likely trying to finish the job quickly. Rookie mistake, the operator muttered. Maintaining social distance saves lives, guys. Clustering together only made the missile's job much easier. Through the zoom, the operator could now distinguish individual equipment, tactical vests, modern helmets, and assault rifles with optics. It was definitely not a delivery of milk and cookies. These were special forces or Marines. And this is where the MAML comes into play. The Turkish acronym translates to Smart Micromunition, and it is a marvel of lethal miniaturization. Weighing just 23 kilograms, it looks like a toy compared to large cruise missiles. However, its 10-kilogram warhead is designed to pierce light armor, or, in this case, turn a ship's aluminum superstructure into confetti and bad press. The missile uses a semi-active laser guidance system. This means the TB2 cannot simply fire and forget. The operator has to keep the laser designator locked onto the target throughout the projectile's flight. It is like a laser pointer for the world's most dangerous cat. At 8 kilometers away, the minimum range for an accurate shot from that altitude, that meant an eternal 41 seconds of steady flight. However, something changed on the screen. The soldiers on the beach stopped passing boxes. One of them waved his hand toward the shore, pointing to the tree line. Were they done? Had they heard something? The operator performed a final check of his systems. Laser designator, operation, missile status, green, wind, less than 5 knots. The conditions were ideal for a kinetic strike. The operator adjusted the crosshair, placing it directly over the center of mass of the group, right between the Tunets engine and the sand. The laser rangefinder calculated the distance instantaneously. 13.4 kilometers. Still too far away. Although the mammal can theoretically glide up to 14 kilometers if launched from high altitude, accuracy degrades beyond 8 kilometers. With troops so close to taking cover in the vegetation, there was no margin for error. He had to wait. The seconds dragged on like hours. 11 kilometers. 10 kilometers. The drone advanced relentlessly toward its launch point.
Contact,
Below,
11 o'clock.
the Russians were still
Hold
oblivious
position.
to the death hanging 18,000 feet above their heads. The operator noticed more details now. He saw the ship's communication antennas, the hull number painted in white, and even the way one soldier adjusted his rifle strap. His finger hovered over the launch authorization button. Finally, at 9:14:50, the range marked 8.5 kilometers. The firing envelope was almost perfect, but something bothered him. The soldiers began to lift the boxes and walk. They were beginning to disperse. If they entered the density of the forest, the laser wouldn't be able to mark them all. The window of opportunity was closing faster than a submarine hatch. The operator knew it was now or never. Whatever they planned to do with those supplies, it had to end right here on the shore. At 9:15:05, the TB2 operator pulled the trigger on his control stick, waiting for the slight jolt of the weapon releasing. Instead, the screen flashed red. Warning, laser designator failure. Recalibrate. His heart rate shot from 60 to 120 in a nanosecond. Down on the beach, the last Russian soldiers were already spreading out. If they entered the forest, the shot was missed. every second was agony. The operator did the only thing that works on both a toaster and million-dollar military hardware. He turned it off and on again. The system ran its self-diagnosis. The loading bar filled up with exasperating slowness. 5 seconds. 8 seconds. The Russians were already stepping into the tall grass. Finally, the laser was operational. The operator repainted the target, but noticed something odd in the thermal image. The ship was not simply carrying ammunition. The boxes they were unloading so carefully had an unusual, elongated, and tubular shape. The soldiers treated them as if they were made of glass. But there was no time for guessing anymore. In 39 seconds, the contents of those boxes would be scattered across the Kherson region. At 9:15:20, the MAML broke loose from the TB2's pylon. The missile's fins deployed instantly, and its semi-active seeker began to hunt for the laser energy point reflected off the ship's hull. The missile fell silently at 250 meters per second. On the beach, the scene was still one of almost painful ignorance. Through the screen, the operator watched a couple of soldiers stop to adjust their load and light a cigarette, completely unaware it would be their last. The TB2's laser stood firm as a rock on the ship's engine. Even the slightest tremor would send the missile plowing into the adjacent field. However, the drone's stabilized gimbal kept the beam locked with surgical precision. The operator watched the range counter drop. 5 kilometers, 4 kilometers, 3 kilometers, 15 seconds to impact. Suddenly, one of the sailors on the ship's deck pointed to the sky. Perhaps he saw the sun glint off the drone's fuselage, or heard the whistle of approaching death. The operator saw him scream, waving his arms frantically at his comrades on the beach. But physics does not negotiate. At a closing speed of nearly 900 kilometers per hour, his warning cries were 3 weeks too late. The thermal image showed instant panic. The Russians on the sand scattered like cockroaches when the lights turned on. Some threw themselves to the ground behind the boxes. Others, in an act of tragic comedy, raised their Kalashnikov rifles to the sky, as if a 5.45mm bullet could stop a guided bomb in its terminal descent. But the operator noticed something bizarre. 2 of the soldiers, instead of taking cover, desperately tried to drag one of the long boxes back toward the water. Why risk your life for a wooden crate instead of saving your own skin? 5 seconds. The TB2's camera auto-zoomed, capturing every detail in 4K resolution. Ukrainian intelligence officers, watching the broadcast at headquarters, leaned forward. Those boxes had specific markings. It wasn't food, and it wasn't bullets. Whatever it was, this mission had just become the most important intelligence find of the week. Impact. The MAML hit the center of the ship at 9:15:23 with precision. The primary explosion split the Tunets' aluminum hull as if it were cheap foil. The shockwave instantly vaporized the 2 soldiers trying to save the payload and threw the others like ragdolls toward the tree line. But look at what happened at the 1.3 second mark. Those weren't diesel fuel explosions. The smoke wasn't black and oily. It was white, dense, and shot out jets of blinding light, visible even in the sunlight. These were specialized demolition charges and thermite cooking off. The ship wasn't delivering routine supplies. It was deploying a deep sabotage team. As the flaming wreckage rained down on the muddy water of the estuary, the TB2's camera captured the final detail that made analysts in Kyiv rise from their chairs. One of the boxes that flew off had broken open, revealing red banded cylinders. These were military-grade explosives for demolishing critical infrastructure. They were intending to blow up a bridge or a dam. In Moscow, some general was about to have a dreadful morning. Russian radio frequencies in the area erupted in screams.
Dark Knight 1,
and then,
clear for launch.
Absolute silence. They didn't send rescue helicopters. There were no support boats. The operation was aborted in real time. Operational security was worth more than the lives of the 6 men who had just been cremated on a forgotten shore. The TB2 operator watched the fire burn for a moment longer. He took a sip of his now warm energy drink and noted the result in his digital log. Target neutralized. 6 months of elite training, millions of rubles in equipment, and a perfect sabotage plan. All erased in 43 seconds by a guy sitting in a gaming chair hundreds of miles away. Welcome to modern warfare. Over and out.